In this video, we will build the tower component of the PiTrac system. The tower is where the cameras, LED strobe, and the Pi 5 and any other hardware is mounted. This video assumes that you've already printed the 4 parts that comprise the tower. If not, a link is shown here on the screen to where the 3D models are for those parts. The PiTrac tower consists of 4 pieces. Pieces ultimately come together like this. This is the front here where the cameras and the LED light will be. And then the back of the tower looks basically like this. So when we've got everything glued together, the tower will look like this. Now, the reason the tower is printed in 4 pieces is basically just for ease of printing on smaller printers. We didn't want to require a large printer to do this. I'm going to use some gap filling cyanoacrylate glue. In this case, this Starbond glue works pretty well. And we're going to start by gluing the 2 lower pieces, which are going to ultimately attach to the base box together. And you'll note that there are some places that where the one side is not in contact with the other side here. So you want to make sure when you do this, you're only putting glue in places that are actually going to contact plastic on the other side. In this case, it's pretty much everything on this piece. You also want to make sure that you don't put too much glue around these small holes here. These holes can be used with small screws to further increase the strength of the tower. I found that they're probably not necessary, but I've kept them in the design for now. Note that we've already put in the brass threaded inserts. That's a little easier to do when you can put the plates directly on something flat. We will mount the PiTrac connection board to the tower piece, in this case the lower tower piece of the back, using 4 M3 screws. And you can see here that the holes are much larger than M3 bolts, I should say, but that's because we will use push-in inserts like these into those holes so that we have a nice secure mounting. The holes here are M3 holes. We'll put this aside for a minute. And I should note that you can mount these inserts pretty easily just using a regular solder tip. What you do is the solder tip goes into the top like this. And the only problem with that is sometimes the solder tip will get stuck when you're trying to pull the insert back out, and in some cases the heat transfer between the solder tip and the mount insert isn't very good. So we're going to be using today some heat set insert tips. These provide better thermal connection between the tip and the insert, and they also have a much smaller chance of getting stuck in the tip. Basically what you do is just replace your normal soldering tip with one of these, and what happens is the insert will go here at the tip, push it down, melt it into the plastic, and you're done. So let's do an example of one of these. And first I should say that we're going to mount the inserts in such a way that the knurled edges are at the top. So you can see the lower part here of the insert is a little smaller. That is going to go into the hole of the back plate like that. And let's see if I can get a little closer view here. I'm going to take the soldering iron that has the M3 tip on it, and we're going to set the soldering iron to about 250 degrees. Unfortunately, I have an old soldering iron, so I'm just sort of setting it to medium heat. So you want to set the soldering iron to a higher temperature if the mount is not going in. If it goes in really fast and you see smoke, then you generally have too much heat. In this case, it's pretty hard to push, even though we've given it a minute to heat up, so we probably need a little higher temperature. Gonna set the amateur Radio Shack style soldering iron to 4 out of 5. Still a little slow going in, but it is going in. Probably takes a soldering iron a moment or two to come up to speed. We're going to push it in pretty much all the way, and then just to make sure it's nice and flush, we can take something flat like this and push it down, make sure it's nice and flush with the surface. Remember that the narrow part of the insert is going to go down into the hole. The holes are sized so that the insert lower portion will just fit into the hole like that. That way you're starting off with a nice straight up and down insert. At that point, start very gently pushing the insert into the hole. You don't want to go too far, and in fact, what you want to do is leave it just a little bit proud so that you can quickly put your soldering iron away and take a tool, like in this case I'm using the back of a tweezer, and use that to make sure that the insert is flush with the top of the riser. That'll make sure the screw also is going straight down. Obviously, if it doesn't quite go all the way down, you may have to heat it up a little bit further and push it in. So we're also going to use some clamps to keep things together as they're drying. These are probably overkill, but clothespins or something like that will work to hold things together. The key thing when putting together the base is you want to start with these lower two halves. And when you put them together, the key thing is to make sure that the bottoms here are aligned so that the power will sit flat on the base box. So it's best to glue it together on a nice flat surface like this. That will sort of automatically align the two pieces, and then you can align the two pieces from side to side by making sure that the sides here are flush. They're not right now. Flush here. And you have a moment or two with this thicker super glue to kind of work the pieces together to make sure that they're properly aligned. So let's go ahead and glue these together now. Starbond recommends about 1 drop per square inch of contact surface. That's probably pretty good, otherwise things can kind of squeeze out. You do want to make sure you just get a little bit of super glue around the edges, and like I said, try to stay away from the holes so that you don't fill them up inadvertently. That's probably pretty good. Again, this isn't a part that's going to take a lot of stress, so you shouldn't require too much glue. Let's go with that. At this point, we're going to Fit pieces together again on a flat surface. You usually have about, I found 15 seconds or so to make sure things are aligned. Just hold them together by hand while we put a couple of clamps in. Oftentimes you'll find that as you put the clamps on, things become a little misaligned. If that's the case, you still have a chance to move them. I'm actually going to do two here. And let's just make sure that we have good alignment on the bottom. We don't right now, so we're going to have to fix that. So you can tell here things have come a little undone as we clamp them together. Things look pretty good side to side. I think things look good there. So let's continue the process. At this point, things look good side to side. We're still nice and flat at the bottom. So go ahead and leave these together for another 15 minutes or so, and then we will continue gluing the rest of the tower together. When the glue is dry, you can take the clamps off, and at this point, if you're worried about the strength of the tower, although I haven't had a problem with this, the tower includes a number of these little holes that will accept an M2 self-tapping screw. Now, these little screws, probably actually an M2 by 4 millimeter would be a better fit. I just happen to have only M2 by 6, so I'll probably have to cut off the back of the screw so that I don't end up puncturing myself later. What you want to do, if you are going to use these screws, is to put them in places where you think there'll be stress. One of the places where there's going to be some stress here in a minute is right here, because this is a lap joint for the tower. So I'm going to put a couple screws in here and here. You may notice the other holes in the board. Those are intended to be used for one of the great things about these black carbon steel screws is that they're magnetic, so that helps. On the other hand, they're also not as strong as stainless steel screws, so you have to be careful when you put these in not to over torque them, because it's pretty easy to get them to break because of how small in diameter they are. So I'm going to put in 2 screws here, then clip off the other sides since they're a little too long. I'm using it says JMCRB plus 2.5 bit, which seems to work pretty well with these M2 screws. Of course, if you're going to buy some screws, something like this with a bunch of different sizes is a lot more economical than buying them in smaller quantities. You may have to prop up the tower so that if you're applying pressure to the tower, it's not going to bend something inadvertently. Like a screw in here that will help support the lap joint when we attach the rest of the tower to it. Yeah. In addition to breaking, you have to make sure you don't strip these because they are pretty soft steel. This one looks like doesn't quite come through, so we're not going to have to cut anything off. In any case, this will provide a little more support to the tower. All right, with that done, the next piece we're going to put on is the top part of the tower, of the back tower. This is going to be where the Pi 5 is eventually going to go. I'll show you that here. It's going to be oriented like this to allow for connections to be made easily here. The connector board, of course, is going to go here. Note that the prints have a up with an arrow here. You want to make sure you don't end up like this. If you do it this way, everything, the holes should line up. And again, we're just going to glue in this portion here, nowhere else. And these little ports will eventually be used to bring wiring and cabling into the camera, and the LED, which is going to sit right here. So let's put some glue on here. Because of the way these boards are printed, they print fairly flat, so the gap filling super glue doesn't have a whole lot of gap to fill, so you may see some squeezing out. Just be fairly conservative in the amount of super glue you put on there. So again, we're going to have about at least 15-20 seconds to position the two pieces. You're going to want to make sure that the piece side here lines up with the side here. You don't want to be distracted by the little supporting side triangles here and here. So I think we've got that about where we want it. You can see they're lined up here. I'm going to go ahead and clamp that. There and there. Actually, better yet, we'll do it right there. Maybe we can get one more clamp right here. There we go. So let's just gently set that down and let it dry. All right. That third piece looks like it's dried. The alignment looks pretty good, especially because you can tell through the holes for the strengthening screws. You can see straight through. That's a good sign. By the way, these other holes here are in place there just to allow for the use of zip ties to try to neaten up the wiring. So we've got one more piece now that we're going to put here. Before doing that, I'm going to put 2 more screws here and here just to strengthen the lap joint, and then the tower should be finished. By the way, you can put screws in either way. I've been putting these in going from the front to the back because they're flat panhead screws. If you have countersunk screws, we did make an attempt to provide some countersinking here so you can go from back to front if you're using countersunk screws. Again, probably doesn't matter. Could be overkill. So let's do 2 more screws here. All right, so with that, we're ready to glue in the 4th and final piece of the tower. This will hold the what's currently known as the teed ball or camera 1 camera. Again, just make sure that you only put glue where you're positive that both sides are going to come into contact, so nothing here. Make sure on this that these columars supports, these risers, are on the top. That's where the shank shield is going to attach to the top of the tower. And again, you want to make sure that this is aligned with this and not this with this, given that these two triangular supports stick out. So here we go. You also want to make sure that the interface here between these two pieces is flush so that you don't have the tower skewing to the left or to the right. So you want to make sure that's flush. You want to make sure this side and this side is together. Looks like we've got that here. It's been 5 minutes, so that should be plenty of time for this to have dried. So now we have the tower. We're going to mount this on the base box here after it's finished printing. And for right now, however, this provides a nice platform for people to mount the Pi, mount the connector board, get the wiring set up, and then do some initial testing before you've got everything put together where it's a little harder to get to parts. So we're going to use this as a development platform, if you will, right now.